Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello. How's it going?
Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Mike.
We should make really formal intros at some point. We should be like, good day, sir.
I mean, I don't know if that's formal or if that's
not formal.
We're like the only podcast. We have the intro song, but what we need is some voice actor to start us off with like, this is the Explicit Measures podcast.
I keep telling you I can do this.
I always wanted Walter White to introduce me, so
Exactly.
say my name.
Say my name.
So amazing. So I think Tommy found this morning. Tommy just literally moments before the podcast starts this morning. Tommy's like, "Hey, did you see this thing on the Microsoft blog?" I'm like, "No way." So I think Microsoft has really flubbed up. They've made the biggest mistake they ever have, and they included our video on one of their blog posts around Fabric. So I'm trying to find it, Tommy. Where's the?
It's in the chat and it's in the notes.
No. I mean, on the page.
You gotta scroll.
Yeah, we're at the bottom, right? We're at the very bottom.
Scroll.
No, we're like the fifth one down. We're top 5, baby.
Can I get a link here? Can I get a link?
Yeah, I need a link.
It's everywhere. It's in the OneNote. It's in our private chat.
No. The page. I need to find it. I can't find us on the page. What's it? Say the
fifth
words.
one down.
Say the words. What does it link for?
Learn from.
Hey, there it is. Videos and
Hello,
podcasts.
Microsoft Fabric. Okay, so they actually did put the episode in there. All right.
We're literally the
episode 218. There you go.
Got it. I don't know why they didn't put us first, because they actually want people to actually talk about the product. Really. Let's be real. This is a pretty comprehensive list. There's actually a lot of really good content. I think this is very smart. Microsoft blog should be pushing all the people that make content for Microsoft. Like this makes sense.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, I think
Thanks for sharing.
There's definitely a lot smarter people in there than us. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we are by far probably the most entertaining, but
I don't know about that either. I think you're stretching it pretty far there, Seth.
I am.
You're stretching it pretty far. Excellent. That was kind of fun to see your name pop up on there. That's kind of neat. A little hook. So, anyways, that was fun.
I made the news.
Yeah, I made Mom on the news.
The funny thing, I know, again, Italian mothers, if I show that to my mom, she's like, oh my gosh, she's on the, not that she has any idea what's going on.
That's what pretty much like 90% of my friends say. They're like, oh yeah, cool, you got a podcast, what's it about? I'm like, I say what it is. They're like, yeah, we watched one of it, like 5 seconds on, when it came up on my Facebook feed. And they're like, I don't have a clue. You said a whole bunch of words, I don't even know what they mean. I'm like, wow, all right.
I don't think I said this on the podcast. I caught my wife listening.
No way.
So...
And that's because you're working too hard and she misses you.
I think so.
Maybe I can just listen to his voice on the podcast.
We were going on a trip, and like her phone will always connect. It's on the van. It will always connect to her phone first.
My wife does the same thing in our van. You get in, and I turn the van on, and immediately whatever podcast they're listening to just comes right on the radio.
And I heard like we're 15 minutes into one. I was like, "Hey, what's this?" And then she was like, I don't listen. And then she like said something. Oh, when you guys said, I'm like, yeah. Oh. So maybe we're gonna get another Microsoft MVP in the house.
All right, Miss Puglia, you've been caught. You've been caught listening to the podcast.
Miss you too.
Be careful. He'll put you to work. So since you've been listening to the podcast, I got about 3 reports I got to get you to get done here. So start doling out work. Let's jump into our main topic for today. We don't have a whole bunch of intros other than the blog post. So, Tommy, I think you dropped that in the... Oh, actually, I probably should snag it here. I'll put it in the chat window. For those of you who haven't seen it, there's actually a ton of MVPs who have made content or built content around Microsoft Fabric. Microsoft kind of went through and just kind of collected a good long list. I think there's probably, 25, 30, maybe even 40, just different videos from other MVPs talking about, communicating about, thinking about what Fabric is doing. And I thought it was a very, very nice post. So thank you, Microsoft. I mean, now that everyone has a free trial and, all the tenants are changing at this point. A question came up the other day for me, just real quick before we jump off of Fabric into our next topic. Does Fabric, so we talk about this one leg thing. and one lake kind of is attached to what Fabric is doing. Are you guys aware of anything around when you go to a workspace, you have so you can make a Fabric workspace, and then in that Fabric workspace, there are settings for the workspace. One of those settings in the workspace is the ability to be able to add an Azure storage account.
Yeah.
Does One Lake mess with that? Can you? I mean, I think that you can still do it. I haven't experimented with this yet. Have you guys played around with this at all?
I don't think it breaks it, but it's still the same settings where you can't have any data flows, or really you have to set that up first. And I don't think it messes with that, what I've seen at least.
So does it become, so my question then would be is, if you build, so for example, right, once you make a Microsoft Fabric workspace, do you have the option of picking Dataflow's Gen 1, which would write to the blob storage account, or Dataflow's Gen 2, which would write to Lakehouse, or the One Lake?
I see. I think
you see what I'm saying?
I think any data flow will push to the one. They'll push to both, because that's a different setting. The
Push
workspace
to
setting
both,
for
this is what I was confused about.
Yeah. Well, no, the workspace setting pushes everything to your lake house, or
but when you have Fabric, you already have the blob storage. So I feel like Dataflow Gen 1 would write to the Azure linked storage account. And if you use Dataflow Gen 2, you can pick the destination, right? So that's the whole idea of like Dataflow Gen 2 is awesome because I can pick any destination I want, or have multiple destinations if I want. But I was just trying to wrap my head. Someone asked a question. I was like, oh, this is an interesting question. I didn't even think about that setting in the portal. What does that do? And does it require you? I don't know. I just was confused. I have to do some testing on this one. I was curious if you guys had a workspace that did this or have been experimenting with this as well.
No, I haven't. But at the same time, if I would imagine they're going to push you to migrate at some point. Like if it's a Fabric workspace, or they're just going to move it. Because when is the last time you've ever seen them like push things into multiple places? Especially if you're going to say this is now a Fabric workspace, my guess is that it just migrates over. Because it kind of breaks the flow of everything that you're setting up is going to be in One Lake. They would have a workspace that would support multiple different other data sources. That doesn't make sense to me.
So let me. I'm going to throw down just a quick what I think is happening. I'd be curious, chat, if you're listening to this, or chat, if you've tested this, let me know. I believe there are now 2 versions of a data flow. If you go into the workspace, and this is how I'm just trying to rationalize and wrap my head around, what does a storage account linked to a workspace mean in the context of what a Fabric environment's doing, right? So if you link a storage account, I think it's still doing all the normal Power BI things. There's still a Dataflow Gen 1 in there. To get to a Dataflow Gen 1, you click on the workspace, you click the new button, and then you move down to where it says, you have to like click the show all button. Oh, interesting. It just changed oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. You click show all, and in the show all button, you go all the way down to the section called Power BI, and there's a thing called data flow, or, it's where the data marts, the streaming, that's all the traditional stuff lives. Then you go to the top, and then there's a data factory or data engineering item that lets you, so in data factory, it says Dataflow Gen 2 preview. So it shows you the options to pick Dataflow Gen 2 or regular Dataflow. And my assumption would be is regular Dataflow would just put all the data into the blob storage account. Dataflow Gen 2 would allow you to write to a destination, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but they'll probably separate this then, right? Because they're not going to remove any functionality.
Right.
With
Agreed.
The licensing
you can't just
BI.
you just can't turn that off.
You'll have my guess is there'll be a different, like it'll be a Fabric workspace. Like if your workspace is supported by a Fabric capacity, then you'll have the new experience and everything will go One Lake. And then if you're in the other one, hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
Like technically, you'll probably stay in and have separate data sources, because that Azure linking to a workspace isn't just for data flows. It also is for backups and
correct,
and restores and things like that as well, right?
Well, so again, here comes my question, right? Once you've linked a Fabric workspace, to your point, Seth, right? Why would I be putting backup files in another storage account?
my guess
I would probably
is
want to put them in
it's a
the one
hard
lake as
cutover.
well.
My
right?
guess is a hard cutover. Like the minute it goes GA,
That's true. GA may change things.
The minute it goes GA, they'd have
Yeah.
to, right? Because like right now, it's tested out, figure it out. But I would say it's probably going to get separated out by licensing.
Yeah, that's true. I did also notice something in here as well. I felt like I saw a note around Fabric. Oh, other side. So many side notes. Other side note. I've been playing with the Git integration on the workspace level.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool what they're doing there.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see how this is going to build into like Power BI desktop, because there's nothing there for desktop for working with individual Gits at this point. But work like making a change to a report or a data set in the service, that looks awesome. And I saw a tweet this morning talking from Matthias saying today the way that information is stored in Git with connecting to Workspace, the bim.bim file is stored as it's inside the service. But it sounds like Matthias was tweeting on Twitter saying the TMDL is coming to Git. So the whole model will be human readable here in a little bit. As soon as they incorporate that, so I'm guessing closer to GA, they're going to start lifting out TMDL and putting that in the Git repo. So then I can see a clear definition of the measures, the descriptions. I really like it.
It's so easy with VS Code too.
Did you guys? So is it my misconception? Because I haven't played with this yet, but I was under the impression that this was going to be like an independent, like we now have source control. But I swear I read something yesterday that like I have to be in Fabric to get this.
Yes, I believe Git source control is a workspace setting that is a part of Fabric.
It's a Fabric only thing.
Yes.
So this means that you have to get onto Fabric in order to get source control for Power.
Yes, correct.
And that's where I was just like, oh, like, well, you, dang it.
Wait a second.
Well, however, the pricing for Fabric just came out. And if you think Git is important, right? Lowest.
It's not a pricing thing. Like it's a how do I go from an old ecosystem?
Oh, how to migrate
a brand new one?
Oh,
right?
So you
can't do my existing reports.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Another thing that I was actually exploring here, and I got to do again. This is what happens when Microsoft releases new things, particularly for MVPs. MVPs jump in and go, all right, let's break stuff. Like, how would this work?
What did you do wrong, Microsoft?
How can I make this thing, as efficient as possible? How can I, push and pull this thing around? So, I'm also very curious to see what happens when, hydrating something, a Fabric environment allows you to use the direct lake connection. You can now pause or not pause a workspace based on that Fabric connection. In my mind here, what's happening is, when you're using some process, it doesn't have to be Spark notebooks inside the workspace. You could use Databricks or some other tool to write Delta tables into the OneLake. So my assumption here is OneLake doesn't turn off. It doesn't go dormant when you pause your Fabric SKU, right? It's OneLake. It's a blob storage account, and you pay for storage, I think, separately than you do pay for everything else that you get storage, you get a storage account, but you have to pay for that OneLake storage separately than part of the Fabric's SKU, I think. I don't really understand that part either. But that being said, if that turns on and you have a OneLake endpoint, well, why not fill up that OneLake with another tool, connect Power BI with Direct Lake into that file, and then just turn off Fabric? Will they block that? Does that block?
No, I don't think it's blocked, the scenario, because in the same way, like right now, when you're using, and you brought up Databricks, right? Like,
correct.
Your storage is technically ADLS Gen 2, or you can configure it that way, right? So
which you should, yes, but you should also
ADLS Gen 2.
But you should also be able to mount Databricks into OneLake. So OneLake has the same endpoint.
I agree.
Okay,
but I think the nuance is, or what I have to test out is, it was my understanding that if Databricks is creating that table,
yes,
it's not going to be as performant as if the Lakehouse was creating that table of data.
Okay, So I think what you're referring to is the difference between Z order and V
yeah,
order
because you brought up
indexing.
direct lake.
Yeah.
Lake
Yes,
connection.
that's a feature of. So I was trying to wrap my head around this, and I think what's happening, my understanding of what's happening is when you do a V order sort in Databricks, you can say I want these 3 columns to be Z order sorted. So basically, it groups similar objects together and tries to make bundles of those in the files below. My understanding with a V order for VertiPack engine, I think that's what V order means. It's the V order packing of the files are looking across multiple columns, and each column it's saying, okay, what's the best grouping across all columns of data? So it may not actually do like, hey, there's a column that has a number, an index number in it, like 1 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000, something like that. It may make decisions to not sort or pick different columns because it's trying to say, based on the groupings that you're going to get in the columnar data, it's trying to group those artifacts together in the most efficient way across multiple columns. And I think that's where the compression really comes from, because then you're not adding extra rows of data in the partitioning process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And to go back, I think within, and I haven't tested this because in order for me to invest an insane amount of time in testing or doing a lot of R&D around Fabric and how it butts up against my enterprise systems at the moment, I need RLS on Direct Lake. Like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Like it's just not usable, and if it's not usable, I'm not going to invest the time right now. But to your point, I think what it does do is open up a whole bunch of different paths of how you could potentially change up your ETL processes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if
agreed.
So if Direct Lake is my go-to, like that's what I want to do because I have a bunch of curated reporting in Power BI.
Yeah.
Are there scenarios where I could take existing enterprise platforms up to a certain ETL
threshold
level, and then pick them up with Lakehouse and the whole Fabric implementation, so that my final objects that I'm using just specifically for Power BI, where I want that Direct Lake experience in V order, whatever, that I pick that up with a new tool. Yeah, absolutely. That's a possibility.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
One thing going off that said, and well, but there's so much to digest still. I was seeing from someone the other day with the direct link or the direct import mode, you're still paying for that when it does, in a sense, refresh, even though it's still not.
Interesting. What do you mean by that, Tommy?
Yeah.
So because there's still some processing that's going on. It's not necessarily because it's not a live connection, but someone was doing a test with that direct link or the direct import mode, and they turned on F2 because Satya sent out a tweet saying, "Hey everyone, just turn on F2, see what you think for an hour."
Yeah.
And someone was testing that. I was like, wow, everything goes so fast with the direct link, but there's a cost.
Right. So this is where
or even just a refresh,
you're using a cluster somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's the ongoing thing where technically this would be a direct query scenario where I would have to have a cluster running all the time in order to service any of the requests. It's likely
a cluster is going to be more expensive than $280 or whatever it is.
Interesting. That's a really interesting scenario, and I'm very interested in seeing how people play out with the direct query or the direct lake.
Yes.
And how that feeds into what you were just talking about, Tommy.
Yeah, I think let me see if I can find the source, but the person was saying, like, they're like, well, what we're going to just do is when we do our refreshes is turn everything on and then turn it off after. And not the F2, but let me see what I can find. But they did find the direct cost from when they were actually refreshing the direct import.
But there is no refresh with Direct Lake.
It's not but it's not a live connection either. There's still some processing that's going on.
Well, it has to, the Direct Lake, basically what I understand is, to your point, Tommy, there is no, technical VertiPack loading process. I think that's happening there. What's happening is the model that stores tables in memory is directly going down to the lake, picking up the partitions and reading those files. Just basically read a file and load it to memory. Like that's all that it's doing.
But that's the same thing your premium capacity is doing.
If you have premium capacity, not a PPU. So yeah, it's the same thing if you have a premium capacity. But for a lot of organizations,
but it's just not visible. Like right now, what I think is going to trip a lot of people up, or it still be very interesting to see, is direct test cases where if we're using Direct Lake, you would probably start seeing how the cluster or whatever capacity vCPUs you've chosen get utilized for those resources. And that's also one of my concerns around like picking a capacity across all these work streams. Or
Yes, you're right here.
Or
that's
you could separate. You could technically separate that out. You could have a separate Fabric capacity just for your Power BI implementation, can't you? Or no? No, you couldn't.
No,
Because it'd
and
have
but
to
the
be
difference
workspace.
too, even premium capacities are at a set cost unless you're embedded on a monthly basis, right? I'm paying 5,000, 10,000, etc. The Fabric is, in a sense, the pay as you
It does
not
both.
pay as you go.
You can use Fabric as a Azure SKU, or you can use Fabric as a buy it from Microsoft. So to me, it's like how you buy it, right? So you're right, Tommy. Like if you buy premium via the Microsoft Office portal as an Office product, it becomes a set money. Here's the cost.
Right.
But then the idea is now you manage the capacity. Like you have to like
Right. You have to manage. Exactly.
Yeah. So if you run out of capacity and things start falling over, you have to go buy a bigger SKU. And the increments on that are much more interesting because it just keeps doubling, right? So usually you don't need like a whole other. I don't need double the amount of capacity. I'm hitting the upper limit of my capacity. I just need a little bit more, which there's not a good method to say. I need incrementally more compute as opposed to like double compute, right?
That's something I gotta dig into. I'm gonna take that one, because how do I ensure, like, my big thing is how do I ensure a separation of capacity, right? Because I can't have production reporting being impacted by somebody doing some large data manipulation, like, or fetching of something, right?
Or
Where
just
you're gonna
processing
suck
their
up
report.
a ton of capacity, right?
This was one of my major feedbacks to Microsoft was that exact thing. Like, look, if I have a guy in the middle of the day or gal in the middle of the day running like select all tables or select all records in some notebook, it's going to suck down all my computing power for that particular query to run. I don't want that, especially if I'm doing a reload on a
building a report that way.
Correct. So I want it needs to like Power BI needs to be smart enough to reserve the computer capacity to continue to render my reports. So like I want to have like a set threshold that says, okay, limit this team or limit these people to not exceed this and make sure that everything else runs efficiently.
Or there's really no way to set with your capacity, like what resources you want to devote to engineering compared to, let's say, just reporting. Like someone could technically suck it up doing something very stupid in a Power BI like model, and there's no way to hold.
And they kind of did that a little bit with Synapse. They tried to start giving you like, hey, here's a SQL serverless thing, and you can know 80% for this team and 20% for that team. Like they kind of started letting you shift the capacity around to different teams, so you weren't overcharging something. I like the idea. I'm just not sure I understand the controls as an admin. How would I control it a little bit better, or at least understand? I mean, it's going to be one of these things where everyone turns it on. Someone clicks buttons they weren't supposed to. Someone didn't turn off what they shouldn't have.
It's supposed to do this automatically, says Raphael. Yeah, it's completely SaaS, and it completely does it automatically. If you check this one box that says, scale it whenever you need to.
Yeah,
like there go your costs.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I see all the scenarios now of people going in and they've turned this on and they're going to use data flows Gen 2 for everything and just try to load everything initially. The amount that workflow is going to be such a cost.
I was also having a conversation with a client that was this exact thing, right? Hey, I've got a handful of old data flows Gen 1. I've got a handful of models. I've got a handful and the question was, where do I go from here? What's the next step for me as a Power BI developer? What should I be focusing my attention on? How do we continue to grow? Again, he literally was asking me, what's the grow up story? Where do I get to the next step? And I said, look, your next step right now is focus on learning Synapse, focus on pipelines, focus on other methods to get data to Power BI, and start thinking through about how you would build your lake in Azure Data Lake Gen 2. I said, but be aware, Microsoft's trying to release this Fabric thing, and Fabric technically does all the things that you want, and Fabric gives you the added feature of Direct Lake. And I still think, Direct Lake still blows my mind on like why that feature exists. It's such a good idea. Such a good idea.
That's actually a good segue.
It's a great segue. So let's talk about our main topic of today. It's like we've done this before or something. I don't know. The main topic for today, and we've kind of been talking a lot about Fabric in beginning here, right? So we've been talking about what about this feature? What about that feature? Well, this plays very well into our topic for today is really a decision guide around Fabric. Microsoft has released 2 really good articles around, how do you decide on, is it a copy activity? Is it a data flow? Do I go use Spark? And then, how do I pick between this thing called the data warehouse and now the data lakehouse? So, I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation just because I think we have a lot of different opinions around this, and this will be good to kind of beat up some ideas here and think through like which of these things we should pick. So, Tommy, I'll let you pick which way you want to go first. Do you want to go down the Fabric route of copy activity, data flows, and Spark, or do you want to go down? Do we pick a data warehouse or a lakehouse?
I'm going to go what's close to my heart if I get to pick. So I'm going to go with the data flow,
Okay.
copy activity, or Spark.
All right, let's do that one first. So let's focus our attention on that portion. So in the article, again, high level of the article, right? The links are in the chat window as well. You can go catch those. They will also be in the description of the video if you want to go follow along and read the documentation. I highly recommend it. But if you read those, you'll see that there's basically an outline. It's basically a table matrix, right? And then it starts talking about different scenarios. Scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. Yeah, let's start there. What do you think? What's initial reactions to the article?
So as I was going through the documentation, I sent you guys the chat yesterday, and it gave me a bit of a giggle. But I've never seen the articles in a sense a bit humorous. But one of the links, I think, understands a lot of the developers' confusion. It says decide, like copy, data flow, or Spark with a question mark. Like, what should you choose when it comes to our ingestion? This has been Power BI developers I've been talking to. I had the same call yesterday, Mike, with someone about, do we migrate everything over? Like, what are we transferring, or where are we going from here? Because we have these tools that have overlap, yet have different, obviously pros and cons. And I think for someone from my point of view of, okay, I know data flows, I know pipelines, but do I need to do Spark? Or do I need to use all of them with the end-to-end solution? Where do I need to incorporate all the tools at once? And part of the kind of the guideline here is, what do these tools do best? Where do they kind of fall short? And the bigger question is, do you need to use all of them, or is there a use case for utilizing each of these tools in one end-to-end scenario?
So let's start at the beginning of what you said there and say, look, there's 3 activities: pipeline copy activity. That's basically Azure Data Factory.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's data flow Gen 2, which is our beloved Power Query, Gen 2 version of it. I don't really know what Gen 2 really does behind the scenes, but to me, Gen 2 data flows feels a lot more like what Spark would be doing, because you can write Delta tables and you've got all this extra, fanciness. So I don't know if it's the same engine. I hope Data Flows Gen 2 is multi-threaded, because that's the challenge with first, the original Data Flows was it seems to tap out after a certain period of time and it just kind of like falls over. So bigger data sets in old data flows didn't seem to work very well for me. Other people have found value from it. If you do incremental refresh with it, yeah, fine, you can get large data in, but it just didn't really feel like enterprise, like large scale ready. And then there's the Spark engine, which is, how in my world, Spark and Databricks are synonymous. So it's like Databricks, but it's not. It's the Spark engine. Yeah. As I look about these different items, I have a really hard time delineating between Dataflow Gen 2 and Spark. I disagree with some of their table matrix stuff.
So, like what?
Like, it's basically the same stuff all the way down, other than the fact, okay, if you want to use Python or R, you use Spark. Everything else is the same. The table's like identical, right? Data flows Gen 2.
There's nuance in here.
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
which is,
as we're going down the matrix.
Yeah.
Code written,
Okay, no, I would agree with that one. That one's
development interface,
Hmm?
sources, destinations.
Well, okay, sources I would disagree with.
So here's how I see this, right? Like one of the things is we're focusing in on the matrix, and I think it's where the guts of the conversation for us is. Where I'd actually start for the listeners is at the end, because that's where they're outlining the actual persona of people with skill sets, right? And I think this is what the value behind this article is. It's showing the tech stack. Like, here's the tool, here's the technical tool, and the different areas within that technical tool that align with certain personas. And I think
Yes.
that's important, because you're immediately going to go into what are the skill sets that I have as an individual, which we talked about. And Tommy, you're comfortable in, data flows, or, well, that's your bag, and you've done a lot of development in there. Well, then that makes a ton of sense, because you're very familiar with that column, right? Versus, and I would say the next part of this is what butts right up behind this is, okay, what is the offering of the tech stack? What are the skill sets we have? And what are the business needs? If all of my data is in tables, right? It's very structured. I don't have to take on complex forms of implementations or tech stacks if I don't have to deal with completely unstructured data, right? So maybe automatically, because if I'm an organization that doesn't have large volumes of data, even if I do have some large volumes, but everything's in table format and it's already pretty well organized, stick with the easy stuff, right? Like, I just want to copy some data into this Fabric ecosystem, so I'm going to take a pipeline activity or a data flow. Why push myself into a realm unless there's a need for Spark or Jupyter or whatever the case may be? And there could be, because that's part of the business needs conversation, though. Like, how is my data stored? What is the alignment of skills and resources that I have aligning to one of these, and how does that influence my future paths for development in my organization? If I'm like, yeah, 5 years out, there's no way any of this is changing, then keep it simple. If all of a sudden you're going to be like, well, we're hiring a whole data science department because we're trying to ramp up on a whole bunch of model and language, LLM and all this kind of stuff. Well, now you're going to be like pushed into Spark in some respects, right? You're going to have some of this environment where people are using Python a lot more than they would be, with a SQL environment. And that's kind of like the value behind, I see some of the alignment in columns and how one would go about looking at this and choosing the path that they go down.
So I want everyone to listen to what Seth said, because it's gold.
Oh, I just ignored it all. I didn't really.
Mike,
No, I'm just kidding.
snap.
No,
Mike is on the side of it.
No, I'm literally taking I'm taking notes of things. There's a couple points I want to make here, but yeah, go ahead, Tommy.
Yeah. It's essential what you said, because it gets to, I think, the heart of where the decisions are coming from, where everyone's like, oh, I have to now become the full engineer. It's like, well, first you got to get access to all this, where for a developer now who's been the BI developer, I don't think they're going to go, oh, by the way, I need access to all of our raw data that's coming in as it comes in the files. If that's not changing, because you can't, in order to use a lot of those other systems, like if you're going to use Spark, the normal use case is because you're getting the direct raw data. But to the huge point to what you said is, if a lot of my tables are already structured, and that's what I also have access to right now, what I've given access to, then yeah, you don't have to do that full, do the full stack. It's just the goal here is pushing into the lake house, not necessarily that BI developer or the normal users now are going to all of a sudden now be given the keys of the kingdom of all the raw data if they didn't have it before. The other, in a sense, tools or approaches, one, don't make sense, and two, are not really, they don't really work, because you don't have the raw files. You're not going to have the CSV files or the raw data system. So what you just said in terms of, if I still have access to what I had before Fabric came out 3 weeks ago, then yeah, keep it simple.
All right. I'm going to jump in with a bunch of comments here. Seth, you talked about structured tables and the need to stay simple, I would agree with you there, 100%. One challenge with the structured tables element that has not been good in the existing Power Query experience is the ability to have slowly changing dimensions of information loading to tables. That's my only caveat to what you just said around like stay with Power Query or the decision point to go over to Spark. And I think the new version, Data Flows Gen 2, does give you the ability to continue to append data.
Yes.
That would actually allow you to have what we would say, hey, look, there's a table in production. I want to go grab all the records that have an updated date as of yesterday, and I want to lift only the records that are changing to my lake. So now I'm going to be duplicating values for the natural key of the column, right? So there's a natural key in that table somewhere. Okay, fine, but that is the challenge that businesses face, right? I'm either taking a snapshot of data right now, what is the value of things today, or I want to see what is the value of that thing every single day that it changed, or a snapshot of it every single day. So I think that would still, I'm a little bit on the fence whether or not I could do that exercise of grabbing the latest record, the most current thing inside Power Query. I think what they just added with where you're writing to destination and then the ability to append or merge or replace the information, I think that solves my problem there. So I think, to your point, Seth, right, I could probably spend more time in Power Query. And what I was saying in chat is you for sure should learn data flows. Power Query data flows, that's what you should learn, like today. That's the easiest thing to learn. It's buttons, it's clicking. You can write a couple custom functions if you need to. Like you can get a little bit more codey if you need to, but 80%, 90% of your workflow could probably just be served from going through data flows. The flip side of this one then is, okay, when is the right decision to go over more towards the Spark side? And so this is where I'm kind of disagreeing with the article a little bit. There's 3 scenarios of people that they're talking about for this decision point, and all 3 of them are data engineers. And this is your point, Tommy. Your point here was saying, hey, what should I be knowing? So there's 2 personas I think that are in play here for using this feature. I think there's the person who was a data modeler who did a little bit of lightweight Power Query. So I think when I look at people, I think the data model persona is a thing, right? Tables, relationships, shaping data so that you can get a star schema. They're doing lightweight data engineering. What you're seeing now in this article is they're only talking about the data engineer, which I think, in my opinion, is a miss. Yeah. Because every business user is doing a little bit of lightweight data engineering already. They may not have been studied up. They may not be like a full-on called data engineer at this point, but you're doing data engineering. And I'd argue all those Excel file users that are moving pieces of data around and copying and pasting them, they're still data engineering. They're doing the engineering work. It's just not in a tool that's going to be repeatable.
But aren't you picking a role of, can somebody with modeling skills just do that and be data modeler? Yes, absolutely. And is it completely different, or does it coincide with data engineer? I think data engineer is this overarching term that they're using within here. That's like, you know how to work with data, transform it, model it, do it, right? Like, are you getting too hung up on modeler as opposed to like, okay, that role fits within what they're saying is data engineer?
Well, so to my point there, right? I think traditionally there was this concept of a data engineer. The data engineer would be on the IT side. They would work in their data warehouse, and they would build tables that would say, okay, I'm done with these tables. Here you go, business. Or here you go, business objects user. I've made the universe. I've engineered the data to a point where I can walk away. And now business, you can show up. Here's a bunch of tables, and you can use said tables to build your reporting or connect to it or whatever, right? So I think what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing they're in the Power BI realm. We've always called that, if you're not just a report builder, if you're building data models, that's a little bit harder than the report level building.
Kind of the developer.
It's kind of more, the developer for Power BI was considered the data modeler. The developer in the data warehouse is the data engineer. So I think, to me, if I look at the Venn diagrams, there's probably a couple roles that each of those personas or those people don't have. Like, I wouldn't expect a data engineer to be able to build measures in DAX. I don't think yet. And so
Right.
That's a feature of the data model that I want my data engineers to have. And maybe I want my data modelers to have more skills like the data engineer.
I'm getting lost because we look at the other article. We're looking at BI developers, data warehouse developers. In here, we're looking at data developer.
Okay. So now,
wait.
You're right, Seth. So this is my complaint with the two articles. The one article focuses like 100% on the data engineer. The other article, talking about warehouse or lakehouse, talks about Susan, a professional developer, meaning I'm not scared of code. Rob, a data engineer, like thinking like, oh, I understand how to get data and transform it into something that I need. And then Ash, a citizen developer, that's my business user. Ash should be inside the other article. So, hey, you need scenario 4 that says, hey, I'm Ash, a citizen developer. What do I use when I look at this stuff? Because the citizen developer can use this stuff.
And there's a huge part here too. And Mike, I completely agree with.
Okay, I see where you're going with. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Because like, I'm with you now.
I think I agree. There's a missing persona here of, Rob, Tom, or whoever it is. Of I'm a Power BI developer who's been doing a lot of the ETL in Power BI, but I didn't have access. Or we've talked about this so many times with data flows and modeling, where they always have a grow up story to go back to the source. And the amount of teams that are trying to do everything in data flows from hard ETL things that need from the reporting point of view, that are business dependent, business critical, but are not up to the source. They're not in the Synapse, or they're not in the warehouse. I think that's the huge persona here missing, is now we can do this with the Lakehouse, that we have the ability to use the Power BI developer role, who's doing major ETL transformations that they've already been doing. It only existed just in Power BI.
Oh, yeah. I don't like the term Power BI developer, honestly.
So,
like,
well, that is,
hey, that's
it's obvious. It's what?
What?
Kristen Wade used.
Who did?
Do you not remember our
yes. No, I understand that. The only reason I'm saying Power BI developer, because I feel like there's a different skill set right now
they're calling it a citizen developer.
But that's in the article. But Christian,
I hate that more than PowerPoint.
Well, burning with fire.
My goodness.
So, but I think I don't like to have Power BI developer as a term, because I think it's too overarching. Like, what does that mean? Does the Power BI developer move content between dev, test, prod in a pipeline? Does the Power BI developer only build data models? Or does the Power BI developer build data models and reports?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes. It could mean all those things, but I like to specify more about like, what are the different workloads I'm trying to think about when I think about Power BI? And so now there's like, I don't really love the Power BI developer. It's too encompassing, too broad of a term. I want to focus in on, okay, we have this persona called data engineer who's making tables of data, and we have this person who data modeler who consumes it.
Hang on, right? Engineer model, enterprise terms, right? I think we were on the right track, and you're going the wrong direction again. Citizen, because right now, no. If we're gonna give feedback on the articles, because we are right now,
true.
In that, if you look at the Lakehouse / data warehouse, right? This citizen developer is no longer just the consumer of data. Power BI threw that away 5 years ago. Right? If you think about the person who's in the business unit right now that's talking about using data flows or anything else, that those are ETL tools that they've been working on to clean and refresh their own data, to do their modeling, to do their reporting. So to me, the argument makes a ton of sense, because where does that person go? Where does the business user who is this citizen or Power BI developer who has been doing bits and pieces of all of this all the way through, because it's connecting through Power Query, it's transforming the data, it's modeling the data, it's reporting. Where is the grow up story for them in Fabric? And I agree with you, Mike. They're missing in the first chart, which is part of the ETL.
Yes.
And technically, like, they for sure then need to get pushed into probably Dataflow Gen 2.
Yes.
As
Agree.
This is
starting part. This is where you start.
The persona of this person is through this chain.
Correct.
So I like the fact that, like, hey, we've gotten some personas. Hey, there's some structure between like how this works.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem like they've put together the end to end of how this flows through different parts of the organization.
And this is the huge part
you
here
said a really good
because
thing there.
the huge part here is previously teams who, whatever you want to call them, that they were doing the bronze, silver, gold, even in data flows, and doing the major transformations. The difference is it only existed in Power BI. The output was only meant, and the only destination was a Power BI report. There was no other place that you could put it, even though they were doing these business critical transformations for their reporting needs with data flows, and it only existed in that ecosystem. The difference now is that ability to actually push that to somewhere that can be utilized in, again, a SQL database. It can be utilized in the Lakehouse, which can be connected to more than just Power BI. It's not so much the transformations that are different for that role. It's the output, it's the actual destination of that data, which is what opens up all the doors. Not so much the tooling. It's really the final destination.
It is, but at the same time, like where my head goes after this is like, okay, well, can't they just keep using Power Query and Power BI? Well, yeah, but if I think about one of the phrases we've coined a lot in the past is think like the business, act like IT, right? And one of the biggest wins of Power BI and now a new Fabric ecosystem is if there are ways to automate or scale what you as a business unit are doing, we want to pursue those, right?
Yeah.
And that takes it out of just this realm of a challenge of this very small little nugget of fantastic insight
Oh my God.
only in a Power BI report. And it says, no, like all the work you did now, we can leverage that in Dataflow Gen 2 in Fabric, right? In this
Yes.
way in which now it's discoverable to everybody.
Yes.
Right. Of
Agree.
course, I want to step into that realm.
Yeah.
And if I step into that realm, I instantly take these citizen developers into that realm. Right. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
So let me go back to your comment you said earlier, Seth. You talked something about, the end-to-end. Microsoft is not producing the right story around the end-to-end architecture of where data flows through the organization. And again, my mind went towards, yeah, this is 100% true. And right now, many organizations are struggling with this design. Power BI gives so much control. I'm going to bear with me here while I kind of go off a tangent. I'll bring it back. Inside a workspace, we have reports, we have data sets, and we have tables of data being produced through data flows, right? All of those elements have different levels of permissioning, and you can design different patterns inside your environment to give different layers of access to those assets. What we're doing is we're going from a thin, like a report that's kind of very baked, done, we're ready to go. We're just going to hand you the finalized report. Hey, business, just go ahead and use that. All the way down to here's almost raw data. Here's, very, tables of information. It's up to you to build your own tables and relationships and data engineering, right? So as we think about, where does the enterprise, where does corporate IT or where does corporate BI live in relation to all these different artifacts? You may decide as an organization to only produce reports, and that's all you share from enterprise BI. You may not decide to do that. You may actually say enterprise BI will manage and create a data model that then gets shared to the organization, and you can build off of that. There may be other teams or other parts of the organization that can go all the way down to the table level. Hey, I'm not going to build you a data model. Here's the raw tables that you would use to produce information. This is DIM product master. This is DIM sales master. This is, fact sales, right? Here's the tables that come out of our systems. Go do what you want, business. Now, I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because what happens now is in any one of these pieces of information, you are now transitioning between what traditionally was IT, which was the team that was connecting to the transactional system, loading tables of data to a warehouse, and then giving metered access to that information to the rest of the business. And what I'm saying now is the challenging part is the transition of responsibility at these different levels. When is someone responsible for a portion of that data? And then how do I transition the data stewardship? This is the conversation. The data stewardship becomes incredibly important now because IT can't move quick enough to build all the tables that the business wants. So what we do is we provide access to that information further upstream. Maybe we give them access to data sets. Okay, now when that happens, if the business goes out and builds some crap reporting off of that big data set and doesn't understand how it works, whose fault is it? And this is where I think that we potentially get ourselves in trouble with organizations, because they struggle to figure out how to successfully transition from one team to another team the responsibility of the data.
And especially if you didn't have the concept like a data contractor, the data engineering team who used to be in charge of this. There are so many scenarios I have from my previous work where realize data flows now can be used without Power BI ever in mind at all. Where in the past, data flows only had the purpose for reporting. But I could theoretically use data flows now. It has just been pushed farther upstream because of Gen 2, where I can develop data flows purely for actually from a table, just pushing this data without it ever needing to be digested by a report, theoretically, and using that and pushing that to other systems. That cannot be understated. But to your point, Mike, that also can cause, if I'm doing the same things that don't have the data stewardship or the governance around that, I'm making,
yes. And
right?
this is where I think I'm not struggling. I'm working through myself is what is occurring here is we're seeing the evolution of a data platform that's bringing in, I would say, another group of people that have been working in Power BI solely, right? So we're now seeing a true merge of data engineering people and business people all in the same ecosystem. And now the idea is we're not just IT or business or, enterprise BI or, a department BI. We now have to have the conversation around this is all of our organizational data. We're bringing everything together. There's the potential to let anyone build in this space. Some of it will be very good and well designed. Some of it won't be very well and good designed. So how does this work? And then how will organizations, so there needs to be more emphasis on your process and your policies that will help you decide what part of this who should have access to what, who's building what, and how do I transition data artifacts from one team to another. Like a lot of times we get stuck in the middle, right? The transactional system has bad data in it. People enter bad data. Fine. Whose job is it to fix it? Do I add business process in my pipeline to fix the data that's coming out of the enterprise system incorrectly? Or do we kick out a task to go to the people who are entering in the bad data and say, go fix your stuff. Here's your fix list. And that is a responsibility handoff between people consuming stuff versus the people who are entering data into the system. This is hard. It's not easy to figure this stuff out.
Well, I think that you're 100% across all these points. It is hard. I think I'm going to spend more time in this area as well, as far as how does a business go about implementing something like this? How does it fit into a framework? And one of those challenges related to that is there's such a push, and I'm on the cusp of just being like, it's really easy to do this, which is, data for everybody.
Yes.
But it also fits into this like, when I go data for everybody and I open it up to everybody, it's like, yeah, I'm a subscription-based service, and the more people that use it, the more we're going to make. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. But
that's exactly what Microsoft's doing.
But in terms of implementation, it creates significant problems when that's the push, and the follow-up is, one security, right? Then we'll provide you all the structure to put together like how we would segment this out. And that's the part that's a challenge of, do I have to wait for some of that? Do I have to wait for some of the features, or do I have to bake them into what I would presume is existing features and functionality I have now in preview?
Yes.
Or is it just such a new environment that I can manage a lot of these pieces just through capacities and workspaces and permissions? And that's the challenge for me. Like, that's why I'm saying I'm going to take this and diagram it out, because absolutely, like, all of these things are now challenging the access to information.
Yes.
And do I think it needs to be traditional BI? Absolutely not. Power BI threw that through a
long time ago
in all that long time ago, because people have access to multiple different systems faster, and the business needs are now solved at such a pace that, of course, that's no longer the way to go. This one, Fabric, kind of mixes all these models together, though. Like, whether you wanted to be there or not, like you're in there. So we've got to figure out like what does it look like from how do we bring these people even further back now though into enterprise spaces?
Yes.
Where we're technically kind of pushing them.
Yeah,
right.
We are. This is what's happening.
As much as you wanted to say like
Yes.
data shouldn't have been, or I'm glad to see that data is now accessible to more of the organization, but just in the same way that IT was in the way, well, like you as a business person that's interacting with data, well, maybe you do need to skill up in certain parts or areas, or we're just defining these guardrails and then like, you know, the AI bots of like easy like, oh, I'm in Dataflow Gen 2, build me a Dataflow that does these transformations and it just happens. I mean, that could be the case too.
Hey, Copilot, do something in Spark for me.
Hey, Copilot, fix this.
Well, and I'll just say this one last time because I really think this
has to be the last time, Tommy. No more than this.
I think it'll be the last time. Just the ability alone with Gen 2 to push to even just a SQL table cannot be understated on what that's done for that role, that user, and what data flows in a sense where it's actually in that ecosystem of the source system.
Give me
just that alone.
Give me why do you need to push it to a SQL server? What are you doing with it?
Why do you need to push it to a table?
Why would you ever want to pull a data flow out and push it back into SQL Server?
If you're doing the transformations that your BI or your IT team's not having, sales transactions, or I there's a few I can't say here, but I'm trying to think of the non
customer specific answer. Okay,
but there's about 10 scenarios I have that we've done with data flows. Like, this is great in the model. Can I use this somewhere else? Because we had to do these transformations, merge other sources together, and what we're doing was all BI, but it was all just going to a model.
Okay.
But these were structured tables we were creating in data.
Okay, you said the words that I was looking for.
Okay, that's as general as I'm getting.
No, it's fine. My issue with what you said was, I like so to your point, I do love the fact that I can write data anywhere, and honestly, it makes sense, right? I should be able to write data, do something with Power Query, and then shove the data back into anything I need. I have a major issue with using SQL servers as a source for data models. I don't think it's needed. And I have, if you are putting data, if you were doing data things and you were shoving data into a SQL server, you better be putting an application on top of that SQL server that needs that data to operate. Like what this says to me is you're actually building an input to the transactional system, which again, I think there's a use case for it. I'm not saying I would never design an architecture that would take data out of a SQL server, do something with it in Power Query, and try to push it back into SQL Server just to pick it back up with Power BI and put it into a data model. That, to me, that's just a total waste of a SQL Server.
I would completely agree with that.
So my point going back here, though, is like if that is your scenario, your design scenario, that's what I have major heartburn against. But to your point, though,
redundant.
It feels very redundant. Like, let's make a server, let's get the data out and do something to it, store it in files, and then let's put it back in it. Like, this is totally the wrong workflow.
Right. If I'm only just doing reporting, then obviously the data flows the source.
Yes, exactly. Right. And I would, the only thing I need to use SQL for is query folding, row level security, and talking to my Delta tables. Like, it should be serverless. There should be no real tables inside SQL. It's just a compute engine that I borrow a computer for to go access things in my lake. Sorry, I'm getting really hot and bothered about that one. That's
just so we're on the same page.
Okay, we're on the same page there. That's my only scenario, but I do want, so again, this is Michael's lens of the world, right? There's going to be people who need that feature. There's going to be people who think they have to go back to SQL Server. It just is what it is. So, like, yeah, feeling. Anyways, this whole topic today, I love this one.
I feel like you're holding back
I'm so fired up today. I'm so sorry. Like, I'm like jittery with all these. Maybe the coffee is extremely strong today. I don't know what's going on, but I feel very passionate about these topics, and particularly around like which tools are now available to us.
Just and I know we're right at time, but just one quick reply to what you said. And a lot of organizations, they don't have the full infrastructure available. They're basically using what they have.
Correct.
Right?
If you have a SQL server, you're going to put it back in SQL and you're going to pick it up from Power BI. Fine.
Well, no, you still don't have to do that. What I'm saying, if you have a data flow that's just going to Power BI, use the data flow. But if you don't have the data lakes or obviously
Yes.
the other infrastructure, but you do need to use what that BI team has done because they have structured the data in a way that can be used in Power Apps and Power Automate to push to pushing invoicing, pushing actual usage. Like for again, let's not get to
Fabric.
Am I making sense?
Kinda.
All right,
We're gonna wrap it. So
we'll wrap it there.
So I feel like we might need a revisit on this one. I think we should definitely come back and actually focus more on like the scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. I wish we had gotten there. We talked so much about like the tools, the tech, picking which things. I mean, that's good conversation, but I feel like we could revisit and just focus on just scenario 1. I had notes around, the persona of Leo, Mary, Adam. What are they doing? How are they using the tool? Does this make sense with my mental model of how these technologies should be used with their workflows? Does that make sense? So anyways, with that, we are literally right at time. I'm going to cut it here. We'll just say thank you very much for joining the podcast. We really appreciate your time today. Sorry and apologize that I got so passionate about this thing. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and learned a couple things. I guess it's good that we argue. I guess that makes for good, entertaining content. Anyways, our only request is if you like this content, if you learned something from it, would you please share it with somebody else? We'd love for the podcast to get out to more people. The only way it can hit someone else's ears and find value is if you tell them. So tell somebody else. We appreciate it. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Yeah, let's make another blog article by Microsoft. You guys can help. So
exactly.
Let's make another appearance. You can find the podcast anywhere it's available: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Make sure to subscribe. Join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. If you have something you want us to talk about, Fabric or Power BI, go to powerbi.tips/podcast, and we got a mailbag for you to submit your questions.
Oh, I forgot to mention at the very end here. I'll throw it in here anyways. The new Power BI PBIP hat is now out on the Power BI Tips store. So go to swag.powerbi.tips and you can go get your very own PBIP hat for real, true developers who love Git. So
those to Rui.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna exactly. I just bought a whole bunch of them, so when I see people, I can go give them out to people. So, anyways, thank you all very much. We'll see you next time.